I left the love of my life because I thought I could do better. Now I'm childless and alone at 42. I wanted to open up and share a story from my life, one that's been on my mind lately. Picture this. Back in 1989, I was at my engagement party, having the time of my life with my fiancé, Jake. We were surrounded by our close friends and family, laughing and dancing like there was no tomorrow. In that moment, I felt like I was about to burst with happiness. As I looked into Jake's eyes, I was absolutely sure he was the man I was meant to spend my entire life with. He was my soulmate, no doubt about it. Our love was so deep and real, and we had our whole future planned out together. Our dreams were simple back then. First, we were going to save up to buy our own cozy little home. Then we'd have a romantic wedding ceremony that we'd cherish forever. Of course, we couldn't wait for the pitter-patter of little feet as children would follow. But here's where my story takes a twist. You see, back in those days, I was just 19 years old and full of naive ideas about life. I thought I could do better, that there might be something more exciting out there for me. I couldn't help but believe I was the girl who had it all, and I foolishly convinced myself that I needed something different. Now, fast forward 20 years later to 1997, and I find myself in a completely different place. I'm single, childless, and wrestling with the painful reality that I let go of the one true chance at happiness I ever had, my beloved Jake. I walked away from him believing there was a more thrilling and fulfilling life waiting for me somewhere out there. But guess what? There wasn't. Sometimes, we make choices in the heat of the moment thinking they'll lead us to something better, only to realize later that what we had was already the best. I am today at the age of 42. You see, I've achieved quite a bit in terms of worldly success. I've got a high-flying career, financial security to boot, and a cozy home right in the heart of London's trendy Notting Hill. It sounds great, doesn't it? But there's one thing that's been missing from my life all along, and it's the one thing I yearn for the most: a loving husband and a family to call my own. Back in the day, there was a man in my life, Jake, who offered me everything I ever wanted. He understood me like no one else and loved me in a way that was truly special. He wasn't just my lover, he was my best friend too. Nowadays, when I see happy couples with their children, it stings. I know that having a family of my own is a dream that might never come true. I often think about the times Jake and I shared, dreaming about having children and even discussing what names we would choose. Looking back, I can't believe I let go of so much happiness. Instead, here I am, back in the singles market, searching for the very thing I tossed aside without a second thought all those years ago. I understand that I can't turn back time and have Jake back in my life. It's tough to hear bits and pieces about his contented life, knowing that 15 years after I ended our relationship, he's happily married today. It's a bitter pill to swallow. As we all go through life, many of us might wonder if the grass is greener on the other side. We might mistake contentment for boredom, forgetting to cherish the good things we already have. My message to those who are thinking about walking away from something wonderful is to pause and consider how different life could be. If only I had listened to Jake back in 1997 when he begged me not to leave him. Tears streamed down both our faces that day. I couldn't bear to see the man I loved in so much pain, and it tore me apart to watch his heart shatter right before my eyes. But despite the agony, I stood firm in my decision. Little did I know that those words I uttered in that moment would prove to be eerily prophetic. "I'll always be here for you," Jake promised, and in my youthful arrogance, I held on to the hope that I could somehow put our relationship on hold and come back to him later. Jake and I first crossed paths at the same comprehensive school in Essex. We were just teenagers back then with our whole lives ahead of us. Our love story began just before Christmas in 1987 when I was 17 years old and knee-deep in my O-level studies. Jake had already graduated and was working as a motorcycle courier. We clicked instantly and our family supported our blossoming relationship. It wasn't long before we fell head over heels in love with each other. Jake had a knack for blending romance with practicality, a trait that would sometimes get on my nerves. His gifts to me that Christmas were a leather jacket and a pair of thermal leggings. Not the most glamorous presents, but they sure were thoughtful. Then, just 2 weeks later, with less than a month of dating under our belts, Jake pulled a surprise move. It happened while we were cruising in my little mini club, man. Suddenly, he yelled at me to stop the car, a sense of urgency in his voice. I slammed the brakes in the middle of traffic, and without a care for the annoyed drivers honking their horns, we both leaped out of the car. Right there, in the midst of the chaos of the road, Jake dropped to one knee. "I love you, Karen," he declared. "Promise you'll marry me someday." I couldn't help but burst into laughter and joyfully exclaimed, "Yes." His proposal had taken me by surprise, and I was elated to know that he felt the same way I did. It was the summer of 1989 when, During a romantic dinner, Jake decided to make it official by proposing with a stunning diamond solitaire ring. Just 2 months later, we celebrated our engagement with 40 of our closest friends and family at the quaint little house we were renting at the time. The following year, we took a significant step forward by purchasing a tiny starter home in Grays, Essex. We moved into it with a mix of furniture we had begged, borrowed, and acquired through various means. The idea of this newfound grown-up life filled us with giggles of delight. I was beginning my career at a funeral and women's magazine, while Jake worked fitting ties and exhausts. Our combined salaries barely added up to £15,000 a year, making it a struggle to meet our mortgage payments. However, we reassured ourselves that it wouldn't be long before our income grew, and we could afford weekly indulgences and a larger home to raise the children we had always dreamed of. Then came the unexpected housing market crash, which thrust us into a challenging situation of negative equity. Initially, our struggles drew us closer together as we navigated the difficulties side by side. But as time passed and my magazine career progressed with a higher salary, I found myself growing resentful of Jake. He seemed to be drifting from one dead-end job to another. Though I still loved him, I started feeling embarrassed by his blue-collar occupations and frustrated that despite his intelligence, he lacked a stable career. Things took a turn for the worse when he purchased a vivid blue and pink VW Beetle. I couldn't help but wonder why he couldn't drive a more conventional car. Seemingly insignificant issues began to bother me. I started yearning for him to be more sophisticated and earn a higher income. I found myself envious of friends who had partners with better financial stability, capable of supporting them as they embarked on their journey to starting families. Regrettably, I stopped seeing Jake as my equal. I lost sight of all the qualities that had initially made me fall head over heels in love with Jake. His sharp intelligence, our shared sense of humor, and his unwavering determination to stand his ground in a crowd were the very traits that had drawn me to him. Instead, I began to see him as someone who was holding me back in life. I started encouraging him to pursue a more stable career, and I was overjoyed when he decided to join the police force in 1995. While it should have marked a new and promising chapter in our lives, sadly, it only accelerated the unraveling of our relationship. We went from spending nearly every evening and weekend together to barely seeing each other at all. Jake's demanding round-the-clock shifts as a police officer kept him busy, while I poured long hours into my work on the launch of a new magazine. Our once vibrant sex life dwindled and our outings together became increasingly rare. I stopped appreciating the little gestures he used to make, like leaving sweet romantic notes on my pillow or scouring second-hand bookshops to find novels he knew I'd love. It's painful to admit that even though he was my best friend, I had taken him utterly for granted. After brooding over his perceived shortcomings for weeks, I finally made the heartbreaking decision to tell Jake that I was leaving. It was a gut-wrenching conversation that lasted for hours, filled with tears and pleas from him, begging me to reconsider. But I remained steadfast in my resolve. Even my parents, who had always believed that Jake was the right man for me, were horrified by my choice. My father's words from that fateful day continued to echo in my mind. "Karen, think long and hard about what you're doing. There's a lot to be said for someone who genuinely loves you," he implored. He knew that I was making a colossal mistake and tried to convey it in the gentlest way possible, but I refused to heed his advice. Convinced that there was a better Mr. Right just waiting around the corner, I moved into a rented flat a few miles away in Hornchurch, Essex. I embraced the single life with gusto. By this time, I had risen to the position of editor at a national magazine, and my life revolved around a whirlwind of premieres, dinner parties, and drinks gatherings as I poured all my energy into my career. Jake and I managed to maintain a close connection even after we had both moved on to new relationships. But deep down, I couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy whenever I heard about the women he was dating. Looking back now, I can admit that my actions were driven by a selfish desire to keep him all to myself. However, our bond remained at the core of our lives. In the year 2000, shortly after he turned 34, Jake introduced me to his first serious girlfriend after our breakup, Sarah. Everything seemed fine until one fateful night when I called him for advice. Jake's response was shockingly curt, and he asked me not to contact him anymore. He even requested that I refrain from sending birthday or Christmas cards, revealing that Sarah had been upset by the last card I had sent. He told me that he needed to prioritize his own feelings, not mine. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Jake was now putting another woman before me. I was baffled and hurt by this sudden change. I couldn't understand how Sarah had managed to come between us. Over the following weeks, I'm ashamed to say that I let my emotions get the better of me. I vented my frustration and jealousy in a series of heated phone calls with both Jake and Sarah, displaying irrational behavior. It wasn't that I wanted Jake back, but I couldn't bear the thought of being overshadowed by Sarah. Predictably, after one particularly nasty argument, Jake hung up the phone and refused to take any more of my calls. Little did I realize it at the time, but that would be the last time I would ever speak to him. Shortly after this falling out, I met Richard. Our romance took off like a whirlwind, and within a year we were engaged and buying a charming farmhouse in the Norfolk countryside. Despite continuing my career as a journalist with a commute to London, I felt like I had finally found the excitement and love I had been yearning for. However, thoughts of Jake never truly left my mind, and I couldn't help but bring him up in conversations, even drawing comparisons between him and Richard. They were two very different people. Although Richard appeared to be outwardly romantic, he repeatedly proved to be unfaithful, leaving me feeling too insecure to start a family with him. Eventually, after 3.5 years together, he walked out, confessing that his latest fling was pregnant with his child. Thank goodness he found someone else. That's right, Chad struck once more. I had left the dependable, loving, and kind guy chasing after a life filled with excitement. But as it turns out, that decision didn't lead to a happy ending. My life began to crumble in the following year, and I faced the daunting task of rebuilding it. During this period of introspection, I finally comprehended the wisdom behind my father's words. It dawned on me that Jake was the only person who truly loved and understood me. When I learned through a mutual friend that he had parted ways with Sarah, I mustered the courage to write him a heartfelt letter, apologizing for my past actions and pleading for forgiveness and a second chance. It had been 6 long years since we had last spoken, and I had the naive hope that he might be open to hearing from me. However, what I didn't know was that Sarah was still living at the house, and she intercepted my personal letter. She discovered my phone number and left me several angry and hurtful voicemails. Once again, my unintended actions had caused turmoil in Jake's life, so it came as no surprise that I never received a response from him, despite writing to him multiple times over the next few months. In the end, I decided to limit my contact to birthday and Christmas cards, figuring that if he ever changed his mind, he would find a way to reach out to me. And then, the unexpected news hit me a couple of years ago. Jake had tied the knot with his new partner, Nicola. For a few moments it felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs and tears streamed down my face. Jake and Nicola still reside in Essex, and as far as I know they haven't started a family yet. The next milestone I'm truly dreading has arrived. It's been a whopping 11 years since Jake and I last spoke, and I've come to terms with the fact that the door to reconciliation has firmly closed. Perhaps he has found what he was looking for and I'm now just a distant memory in his life. Of course, that's the harsh reality. He likely hasn't thought about me in years, or if he has, it's probably been to reflect on the lessons he learned from the way I treated him. Since my breakup with Richard, I had one other significant relationship with a man named Rob, which lasted for 4 years. Interestingly, Rob reminded me a lot of Jake. He was a decent and honorable man, the life of the party, but with a kind and sensitive side. However, we both carried scars from previous heartbreaks, which ultimately prevented us from making it work. While I longed for children, he had already raised a grown-up son and had no desire to start over again. So, once again, I find myself on my own, plagued by thoughts of, if only. If only I had stayed with Jake. I often think I would most likely be happily married with children by now. And that's where my true belief lies. I see marriage as something beautiful and magical, but it shines most brightly when you're young, naive, and still hold unwavering faith in it. However, as you age, the dating scene becomes a rather grim and disheartening experience. People become jaded and embittered, making it exceedingly challenging to find that kind of romantic, Disney movie-type love we once dreamed of, as it often feels like it doesn't exist in the realm of middle-aged dating. Reflecting on my past, maybe Jake wasn't the right man for me. I'll never have a definitive answer to that question. However, what's undeniable is that my decision to leave him has unequivocally cost me the chance of ever becoming a mother. It's a truth I must grapple with, and I acknowledge that my focus has been largely on how this has affected me, without fully considering the destruction and heartache I caused him. You're absolutely right. I can't help but acknowledge the possibility that I left a lasting impact on Jake, one that may have caused him years of emotional turmoil. Whenever I revisit our hometown and come across friends and family, there's a part of me that secretly hopes to bump into Jake. In my heart, I want to apologize and let him know that I'm genuinely sorry and that I'll always be there for him. However, deep down, I wouldn't be surprised if he chose to turn his back on me and simply walked away. To those who may be contemplating walking away from what might seem like a mundane or ordinary relationship, I want to offer a piece of advice. Don't confuse contentment with unhappiness as I once did. Sometimes contentment is a choice and walking away can lead to a lifetime of regret. Well folks, that was quite a lengthy story, but it serves as a valuable reminder of the importance of making sound decisions in relationships. It highlights how some individuals, regardless of their gender, can make impulsive choices and underestimate the value of a stable and loving partner as they age. It's easy to cling to the idea of being the same person you were in your youth, but the reality often doesn't align with that perception. As you age, your life becomes a reflection of the choices you make. This story is a testament to the consequences of poor decisions and the longing for the good times before things took a turn for the worse. For all the guys out there, and even the younger ones, remember that if you ever feel like someone is taking you for granted, exhibiting hot and cold behavior, failing to appreciate you or demeaning you in front of others, it can lead to a sudden and painful detachment. This experience can indeed be traumatic, impacting your self-confidence, self-worth, and overall mental health for a long time. So let this story serve as a reminder to be mindful of the choices you make in your relationships and to value and appreciate those who genuinely care about you.